Great morning, humans. Great morning, world. This is your boy, Dr. JC Doornick. And this is another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. And this is Make Sense Mondays. So today we're going to make sense of science. And this is going to be an interesting one that will probably, hopefully, ruffle some feathers. So I'm just going to take some time right now in our live format to allow some folks to come on in and check in for our live audience. As you know, we do this live via video, but the edited version will come out in the podcast, in the Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick podcast. So for those of you that want a shorter version, a cleaned up version, more concise highlights only, come check out the podcast. But today we're going to make sense of science. And what I wrote here was, does science represent fact or just another belief system or even opinion? I'll throw that in there, that we've been persuaded to believe in rather than, something that is factual. So welcome everybody. Great morning. When you come in on the live format, you can check in, let me know where you're coming from, what platform you're using. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're streaming all over the place. And then, as I said, we're also recording this for an edited version of the podcast, Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, that will come out later in the day. A lot of exciting stuff coming on up. So just interact, come on in and give us a hello. Let us know where you're coming from. And maybe even let me know what your current reality is. How are you looking at this day? Is this day dictating how the day is going to be, or have you decided the way the day is going to be? Great morning from Arkansas. So there is the amazing Chris Cushing. Great morning to you, my friend, as well. So as people trickle in, we will say hello in the live format. And what's great about the live format, for those of you that like controversy, is there's a very, very good chance that I could do something wrong and I could screw up in the live format. So enjoy that. Great morning to you, Colleen, and a very, very big congratulations on your news of getting engaged. It's funny. I was just thinking about Colleen and her situation. She, recently just announced to everybody in our community that she's engaged. And I think a lot of people will resonate with this. But then we found out that it actually happened a little while ago, but then they just broke the news. And we do that with babies and things like that. Isn't that funny how human beings have this tendency of having potentially big, big news, but going through that waiting period before they let people know? And what's fun about that is that there is a fun game in there, because if you let somebody know early, it's special, right? Hey, we haven't told anyone yet, but I'm going to tell you, rough start to the day, but flipped my script. Yeah, very good. Good idea. We all have that opportunity, but yeah, it's a leverage, move that we can all have, is if you have some news that you have not yet let out, you can actually use that news to let somebody know that they're a really, really good friend. Isn't that funny? So, but now that you know that, maybe you will use that to your advantage, and then the world might say that that's a problem. All right. So today we are at our Monday, first day of the week, and we're going to do our Make Sense Monday. And as a reminder, what we're doing with Make Sense Mondays is, we're looking to gain an advantage over everyone else. And I know that you've been taught not to do that. But I'm going to give you permission to gain access and an advantage, an unfair advantage. And remember, if you ever gain an advantage, it's only unfair if you don't teach somebody else how to do it. But what we're going to do is we're going to look to gain an unfair advantage over everyone else by simply becoming aware of some things that the sleepwalking masses, as I refer to them, are not aware of. That's the first step. I teach something called the interface response system in our private Make Sense Academy community. If you're interested in more in-depth work and some more consistent work, this kind of a conversation, but live and interactive with us in our private community, just always welcome to put the words "make sense," and I'll send you a invite to that. And I'm working with my wife, Chicken Mika, and our partner Jules Loken. But just interesting, aspect that the world is pretty much sleepwalking, right? So if you decide to just allow yourself to become aware of things, I mean, forget about the fact that whether or not you take action, which is required. But if you just allow yourself to become aware of certain things, you have an unfair advantage because the world is sleepwalking. So that's the first step of that interface response system, is just to become aware. Allow yourself to become aware of things. And that's a big theme because we're going to talk about science and belief today. And very often the human behavior is that they get locked and tethered into one thing. And what they can't see is because they're so committed to one thing, which they've been taught to do, it doesn't permit them to be open and curious to another. So by showing up and Make Sense Mondays, it's giving you the ability to allow yourself, take the right protect switch off of your SD drive and allow new information. You don't have to tether to it. You don't have to, lock it in, but you're just going to take a look at it. As an observer. So remember, it's who you are that determines how well you do. It's who you are that determines how well what you do works. And if you change the way you look at things, you'll find that the things that you look at in life begin to change. But that would have to be a choice. If you're locked up and stuck and frustrated and not satisfied with your life experience and where it's projected to go right now, then what you're going to want to do is see things change. So the first step would be to allow yourself to change the way you look at things. Welcome to Make Sense Mondays. All right, make sense? Are you ready? Okay, so let's start off with this concept here today. How does the human being, you and I, how do we create a belief about something, but then take that extra step of making that belief something that we lock in, right? Take the right protect of the SD drive off, lock it in as what we would call the known, or something that we would determine is a fact, an exclamation point at the end. How does something enter our lives as a belief and then go to the next step, sometimes regardless of whether or not there's fact, or in this case, we're going to talk about science or mathematics that prove it, but we still lock it in as fact and we start to preach, that. Even if there's a tickle in the back of the human brain that says, you don't really know if that's true. But how do we get to this point where we can say something is true without proof, right? So that's an interesting thing. So in my almost 20 years of being a human, but also somebody that is very entrenched in studying human behavior and the human brain in specific, and what motivates the brain to perceive things a certain way and then react. I've made one very, very clear distinction, and I want to share that with you today about you and the human brain. The way that the human brain works, and this is exciting, but it's also dangerous because it might be the reason that you're stuck and frustrated right now, but it's also the thing that will unstuck you and unfrustrate you right now, is the fact that things don't need to be fact, right, in order to become facts. So what that means is your brain has the ability to believe in anything without proof. And guess what that means? Here's what's exciting about that. That includes you and what you think about your ability to succeed, to change, to rise up, and things like that. I'm doing things in my life right now that I still can't believe I'm doing, because there was a time in my life where it just wasn't part of my ideology. I just didn't resonate with that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So what are the man-made things in life that help you and I, or persuade us to shift our perception about something that can at once be perceived as impossible, right? If you can tap into this idea of taking something that's one perceived as impossible, and then in another moment, not only become possible, but a fact, and one that you can begin to defend no matter what others say when they present their facts. So what I'm saying is something that you right now, because it's not in your belief system yet, can become part of your belief system and then become part of what you know to be fact, to the point where you will defend it. And what are you defending it against? You're defending it against what other people claim to be facts. So this conversation today is about, like, how do we determine things are facts? There's many, many different ways. And some of them are more on the factual side, but some of them are more perceptions based on perspectives. And we'll talk about the difference between perspective and perceptions today. What's the value of this conversation? As always, it's to set you up for success, set you up for more of a win in your life experience today by becoming the dominant force of your thoughts, feelings, and more importantly, the thing we control the most, our response to what's going to happen today. Because what's going to happen today is going to happen today. So these things are opinions, right? So we have opinions that we're indoctrinated to, and culturally related stimulants, right? So that's one way that we create our beliefs, which turn into what we call the known, is we hear opinions and cultural related stimulants from things like religion and politics that capture the deeply entrenched beliefs of our brain and individuals in general. So think about that. Think about your mother, father, your teacher, your preacher. Society is supporting that. And then you've been paid forward and shared everything that came from evolution, right? So think about all of the things that you were taught. And we know that to wire something in your brain, it just needs to be repetitive, in the teachings. Because the first time you learn something, you don't believe it right away. Well, I guess you could if it comes from the right source, but you have opinions and culturally backed up and related stimulants from things like religion and politics from your mother, father, teacher, preacher. See, this is interesting. During the formative years, the human brain basically accepts everything that it learns as what is. But we don't have the ability in those early years to understand that there's a perspective that it's coming from, the teachings and the style of teachings and the passion or the lack of passion behind it. So we're being programmed by people that are taking what it is that they think to be true, but using their own perspective and life experience and their own philosophies to teach us. And then we just say, oh, that's what it is. So right now, there's a good chance that what it is that you see is just what you believe you see, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what is, if you can understand that. Make sense? So they're the opinion and culturally related stimulants, like things like religion and politics, and capture the deeply entrenched beliefs of individuals. And then there are the more studied. Now, I don't even know how much validity I can give the concept of studying, right? But the more studied and mechanical stimulants like mathematics and science. So right now we're at a bifurcation. You now, and this is that unfair advantage, you now have the ability to say, where did I get my information from? And what was the perspective that it came from? Are you more apt to believe in things that came from a certain source and that you resonate with because you've been indoctrinated into that? Or are you somebody that checks facts using things like mathematics and science? I'm not saying one is better than the other, because I'm open and curious to anything that is better. I look at the world as a scientist, and I'm going to share what that means. But I just want you to just be aware, because if you want more in life, you might want to take a look under the hood. So what's most interesting I want to talk about science today, because this is about making sense of science. What's most interesting about science, in my opinion, is the scientist, the characteristics of the scientist. I'm not so much tethered to science. I'm more interested in how science comes about, and that is via the scientist. So I had an interview, and it's one from the vault. It's actually in the Make Sense podcast as well, but with cognitive psychologist, best-selling author of a book called The Case Against Reality, one of my heroes, one of the smartest individuals in the world, blown up on TEDx or TED. He's also a professor at the University of California, and his name is Donald Hoffman, one of the smartest, most intelligent, open and curious scientist that I know. And he shares an interesting fact about being a scientist. Remember, scientists have created science. So we're kind of looking like, is science valid? Because it is one of the things that we use to create belief systems and what we call facts. Because some will say that science is just another opinion because it is man-made, right? They're just using formulas for it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the ultimate baseline of truth. Because I don't think anything is the ultimate of baseline of truth. I'm always looking for the next most valid version. So when somebody tells me something and they want my opinion, I would say, well, I need to learn more. And unless it is interpreted in my mind as something valid, I just leave it as something that you believe, right? So what he shares is an interesting fact about the scientist. Hoffman explains that the scientists, this is a fun way to live your life, are not so much interested in being right as much as interested in learning what is more right, righter. So that's what I love about being a scientist. I love the idea of allowing myself to not so much need to be right, but more interested in this idea of learning or being open to evolutions and improvements of what's right. Now, that's a big difference between the way I used to live my life. Okay. So, when a scientist shares his scientific theory with others, this is fascinating. This is what I love to listen to scientists talk to scientists. A scientist will share their scientific theory to a room of other scientists, and he or she is presenting something that, they believe, and this is a hypothesis that they believe that's based on their findings. So remember, scientists use scientific formulas to to get their what they're called their findings, and then they present them to scientists. And if everybody accepts it, it becomes science. But what's interesting about scientists is if after I present my theory, my hypothesis based on my findings to other scientists, if another scientist steps up and then begins to present an alternate theory on the same topic that's based on their findings, if I'm a scientist, I will look at that and be open and curious to that being better, because what my interest is what is the best, most accurate, most up-to-date version of the truth. Because I don't think we're ever going to know the truth, but what we're doing is we're using things to determine what the truth is. Now, remember, there's that other side that doesn't care about science. They think science is an opinion, and they use what it is that they learned from when they were children. They're putting the keys of trust into the mother, father, teacher, preacher, society, believing what they see in society and on the news, and also just assuming that our forefathers that passed on everything that they learned about what's good and bad and things like that is fact. So isn't that interesting? So you can ask yourself right now, what side of the track are you on? And I just want you to know that I'm fine with it. Today, we're just making sense of science. I'm challenging science to see how valid it is, or at least what my opinion is. So the other scientists, when they hear that you present, will not feel the need to dispute who's right or wrong, but rather listen to one another with the open curiosity to see whose science is more solid. Wouldn't that be a fun way to go through life without having to stand guard over the things that you think are fact when you kind of know that there's no fact behind it? It's just what you think and you feel. And there's some value to committing and standing to protect, right? But it's holding you back from learning something that might be more true or righter, right? So rather than listen to one another with an open curiosity to see whose science is more solid. So I love this idea, and I live my life in what I call an apathetic and equanimous way. See, we were born to think that being apathetic was a bad thing, but all it really means is not being disturbed by external temptations and passions. I don't allow myself to be disturbed by external temptations and passions. And what would be a temptation? It would be me buying into something just because it's coming from somewhere, and just thinking if it comes from there, science or my religion, it's true. So I don't see either side as one that just, so I live my life apathetically and also equanimous, right? I like to gain wisdom as I go through life. And I just find that it brings me closer to where I want to go. So what I mean by saying apathetic and equanimous is um, to try to live my life and interface with the world with a state of mind that is not easily persuaded by the things that just simply sound right. Remember, if you hear something that sounds right, how did you come to that place where you think something sounds right? That's your perspective. And where does your perspective come from? Your mother, your father, your teacher, your preacher. So if something sounds right, it might be a bad thing unless your system and how you're moving through life is satisfactory to you. But if you're not enjoying the metrics and you want more and you know there's more and you want to take more advantage of this 24 hours in front of you, you would need to switch or flip a switch, undo the right protect, and allow yourself to be more open and curious, more apathetic and equanimous. So love that. So I'm experienced enough now in my life to allow myself time to pause and think. Because if I don't pause and think, first step or second step of the interface response system that we teach in our community, if I don't allow myself to pause and actually think, then I will just allow my knee-jerk reaction to just, do its thing. I'll run my regularly scheduled program. Remember, it's who you are that determines how well what you do works. And if you change the way you look at things, that's how you get the things that you look at to change. So if you're not willing to even stop and think about looking at something a different way, well, then nothing will ever change. Now, if you hear that right now and say, he's crazy, well, that's because you've taken that other path, right? Because if you really, really look at things like the truth and fact and look at it in any way, you'll see that the human brain decides what's true. In fact, whenever somebody tells me something and in my brain it processes as insane, it doesn't matter what I think, because whatever you think is what is. So you have the ability to control that. So if you don't like your current situation, change the way you look at things. So why is this such an important topic of discussion? Because most of the reason people struggle in life is due to the degree of ease in which they can be persuaded to be sure about something. The degree and ease upon which a human can be persuaded to believe something and bring it into the realm of what they know and fact, right? That happen to maybe have a possibility of not being fact and not being so. The Mark Twain, it's not what we know that gets us in trouble. Or no, it's not what we don't know that gets in trouble. It's the things that we know for sure that just ain't so. Are you open to that? Are you open to the idea that some things that you know just ain't so? So I believe this vulnerability lies within the information of our ideology. It's a really cool word to think about. Ideology through our programming. Ideology, just in case you didn't know what that meant, is a set of opinions or beliefs of a group or an individual. Very often, ideology refers to a set of religious, political beliefs, or a set of ideas that characterize a particular culture. Capitalism, communism, socialism, Marxism, those are ideologies. So stop right there and don't look at it as good or bad, but just recognize you probably have some form of ideology, and that makes you vulnerable to being persuaded in a certain direction. Sit with that. Sit with that for a second. The degree and ease upon which you can be persuaded to believe something is very much attached to this concept of your dominant ideology. So the dominant ideology in society is passed along through the society's major social institutions. I've got a new daughter. I've got two older kids, but I'm doing it again and I'm watching it. And how is it passed on? Social media, the family, education, religion. So your mother, father, teacher, preacher, society, evolution, AKA what I call your programmers. That's how you're being passed on and becoming tethered to an ideology. Now, some people would say, but that's my survival mechanism. I have to have some sort of a belief system as my baseline to use. I get that. And that's why it's not an easy thing. But what I'm telling you is it might be getting you in trouble because it might be making it easy for you to be persuaded by things that just ain't so, or not necessarily true. So it's wired within you, and it's giving you this predisposition and vulnerability to buy into certain things and shut down others. Remember, if you're easily persuaded into one thing, you're also easily persuaded to shut down other things. That's called cognitive bias. So one of the universal predispositions is that of science and the validity of it. What validity does science bring to the table? If you're easily persuaded to say, hey, it's science, so therefore it's true, that's what I'm disputing here today. Is everything that we read in a scientific journal, like I remember as a doctor, people would always say it's a peer-reviewed journal, right? So what does that even mean? You know, okay, so a certain group of peers reviewed this and it's based on scientific formulas. Does that mean that it's the end all science? Well, there's a way of looking at that. And I think that it probably means that it's the most updated version of something and it's at least been researched. So I kind of lean on that side of not believing everything, but recognizing that if I read something that's been peer reviewed and backed on science, it doesn't mean I'm all in with it. It just means, oh, that's the most updated version of the truth. Interesting. Noted, right? But at the end of the day, if I want to change the way I look at things and see the world change, I can do that. I can decide to do anything, but I don't want external forces doing it, right? So another interesting ideological pattern, this is really fascinating, of human beings is to get tethered to the ideas that have been fed to us. The things that we've been fed are right and, versus wrong. So one of my favorite is this idea of that humans are supposed to care about everything. This is one of the things that I think that we've been fed. You're supposed to care about everything. I see the value in it, but the problem is that, like, if you're like me, most of my life, I cared so much about everything that I didn't take time to care about myself. So you can get persuaded to get so busy caring about everything because that's what you think you're supposed to do, including politics, war, religion. I tell people that I don't watch the news and it bothers them. Well, I shouldn't say people, but some people, it bothers them because they say you should care about it, right? And I wonder if they ever sit back and say, he didn't tell me what I should do, right? He just told me what he does. But there's an example of how we've been taught that we should care everything. So even if it has nothing to do with my goals, in fact, if I say watching the news has nothing to do with my goals, I'll get labeled as selfish. What's wrong with being selfish? Human beings don't think, say, or do anything without having value for themselves. So it's a fascinating concept. So this prompts people to watch the news, scroll social media, and take part in the conversations that they deem crucial and worthy of their time. And then on the other hand, they approach somebody like me and say, I'm stuck. I want more. And then when I look at their diet, and I'm not just talking about what they eat, but what they consume with regularity. Well, I say, well, that's why you're making these assumptions. It's because it's based on your consumptions in life, So this idea of you are what you eat goes further than just food. So even more worthy than going after their dreams, these things that they're so caring about. So this makes humans highly distractible. And I came up with a new word called distractibilityitis, right? So I think it's the number one disease in the human race right now. And you're seeing it like get acceleratingly worse with children, is how easily distracted we are. So you want to become the dominant force of your life, you have to become aware of this. So remember this. All humans carry two attributes that are running on autopilot in their sense-making machines all the time. When I say sense-making machines, I mean your brain and your six senses, your virtual reality suit that's interpreting the world. Here are the two traits and attributes that are running on autopilot in your brain all the time: perception and perspective. Write those two words down because it's very interesting. They can sneak by you, and you could be basing things on your perception without understanding that it's based on a perspective as well. So let me just explain the difference between perception and perspective. This is a power move for you today. So it's valuable to become aware and know the difference of these two. So perception is the mechanical process of interpreting sensory information. That's with your brain and your sense and your six senses, right? Your senses perceive things, goes to the brain, make a decision. That's very much affected by your mother, father, teacher, preacher, society, evolution. But that's what perception is we just automatically perceive things and we feel things. That's perception. However, perspective is an overall framework through which we view the world. So this incorporates other things. Perception is more immediate and sensory based. That's our stress response system and things like that. While perspective is a broader, more abstract concept that encompasses our beliefs and our values. So do you see the difference between me having a perspective on something? When I say I have a perspective on something, I'm saying something that's based on my beliefs and core values. And we know where those come from, right? Could be some science and mathematics, but also could become religious and indoctrination and things like that. That's what a perspective is. So can you see how your perspective, which encapsulates your life experience and programming thus far, has actually sculpted and created the lens and ideology through which you look at the world and create your perception. Your perception is based on your perspective. That's the power move right now, is to say, is what I see what I get or just what I see? This is really, really important. And there's some science behind this, right? But what we're doing is we're just allowing ourselves to say, I wonder where my perspective came from. So that's a big conversation that we have. That's the first step of the interface response system. Where did I become who I am, and why do I look at things and feel this way and think this way? So that's that MFTP, right? But now we're saying, and that is very much in control or persuading my perception. So no, what I see, even right now as I'm talking to you, is not what I get. What I see is what I see. Do you have the ability to recognize that right now? If you do, you're on the verge of a breakthrough. But it's not easy because your perspective is locked in. It's like a 120,000 ton oil tanker moving forward. So let's see, we got Colleen says, the idea of caring makes me go, We can swing the pendulum. If I care too much in the past, I might choose to turn the dial too far back on not caring. Interesting, right? So this is a great conversation. We are intricate beings, yes, we sure are, based on our life's experiences. Well said. I love that. So perspective and perception. So this idea allows us to look at the value of gaining a new perspective. Are you open to gaining a new perspective? That's what it means to change the way I look at things. I have to first be open to gaining a new perspective. That's what changing the way you look at things requires, is your openness to look at things differently. Are you open to gaining a new perspective? That's what the Make Sense podcast is about. It's not about telling you you're right or wrong. It's just about saying, like Colleen said. So gaining a new perspective, and one that is based on what's actually happening. If you really tap into the power of your sense-making machine, that's not tethered to your perspective, and you just allow yourself present moment to look at things, and not one that's based on what you've been persuaded to think is happening. That would be the idea of gaining a new perspective. And that is sexy. That is a lot of fun. So my conclusion about science, making sense of science, is this. I like to voluntarily interface with the world as a scientist, right? I think it's fun. I like the idea of not requiring my program perspective and ego to be right as much as it wants to be, and also allow myself to remain open and curious to what's right rather than be open and curious to not just look at what's right, because that's my first instinct, but open and curious to look at what's righter or more right. So in my coaching and in my private community, called the Make Sense Academy, you can always write Make Sense and I'll send you an invitation, risk-free, check it out. We teach a 4-step process called the interface response system. It's a really fun, goof-proof system that you can run while you're interfacing with the world, which you could learn by listening to the first 10 episodes of my podcast. If you go back and start from the beginning, listen to the first 10 episodes, you'll understand what the interface response system is. But if you want to actually learn it and wire it in and become the dominant force, check out the Make Sense Academy. So I see science as the most current baseline to make our best guess at what we can believe and call fact. It doesn't mean it's fact, but it's the best we have at this time. Do I also allow myself to be exposed to things that are not backed by science? Of course I do. Of course I do. But I don't easily become tethered because I'm not easily persuaded. That's the thing. That could be dangerous. But I find myself tethered to my ideological beliefs and allow them to become that baseline for what is deemed fact. So let me read that again, for at least for the other episode where I'm going to clean it up. I see science as the most current baseline to make our best guess at what we can believe in and call fact, and know that it's always open to new and better theories that will evolve into my more accurate, what I call facts. But if I find myself tethered, this is the key. If I find myself tethered, like automatically assuming things to my ideological beliefs, and I allow them to become that baseline for what I think is fact, if I catch myself doing that, well, then I assume I'd unconsciously practice cognitive bias like the world is doing right now and protect this concept, whether it's true or not, and also shut everything else out. So observe yourself and observe the world right now, practicing cognitive bias. It's like if I say something that potentially proves what you're saying is wrong or even insinuates it, you're just going to go, no, 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 and I'm the enemy. Okay. So what can you do with this information today, right? You can actually start to work on this stuff. Okay. Makes sense? So that it'll help you start to look at things differently, and then naturally the things that you look at will change. I'm telling you, you've been blessed with 24 hours today, and you can make it just completely pivotal rather than just go through the motions and allow give the keys of trust over to your programmed, way of doing things. I spoke to a client this morning, and I could hear them going back to their old patterns. And I just said, hey, how do you feel about that? Do you want to put a stop to that? And they said, yeah. So then we have something to work with. So share the words make sense with me through the comments or direct message or email. And I'll hook you up with all of our cost-free assets, for your personal growth as well as your expansion. And I'll also introduce you to our community where this conversation is happening live, and we're discussing things and people are making breakthroughs. And in essence, what we're looking to do is awaken the sleepwalking masses and rewire people's brains and empower them and equip them to reclaim control of their lives. If that sounds sexy to you, reach out, give me the words make sense. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.